Sazali, where he played dual roles of a loving father and a rebellious son.
Satu perbuatan Sadri, Bapak yang bertanggungjawab. Oh, Bapak mau mengusir Sadri keluar dari rumah ini ya? Bapak tahu.
Actors, workers and studio staff turned out in full force at the airport to welcome P.Ramlee home from the festival. But as P.Ramlee's popularity soared to a new high, the silence of the press was deafening.
P.Ramlee sudah tak ada news lagi tentang P.Ramlee. Wartawan sudah boycott kat dia.
His new status as the Shaw's golden boy intensified the resentment of established actors and directors who had considerable influence on the press. But Ramlee's career was just beginning, and his critical and box office successes held out the promise of further cinematic brilliance. P.Ramlee continued to enjoy spectacular success with each consecutive film he was involved in. Everything he touched seemed to turn to gold, but the stunning pace of his professional life left him very little time for his family. Nurizan began to feel neglected. It was not the life she had envisaged when she gave up the palace for P.Ramlee. But for P.Ramlee, marriage to Nurizan inspired such artistic brilliance that he was able to make 12 highly successful films. P.Ramlee's success continued to be a thorn in the side of established directors, actors and journalists who would use every opportunity to discredit him.
Sebenarnya komplot ni daripada zaman awal lagi. Abang belum pergi ke studio Lampau lagi. Sebelum tu bila abang pergi, abang dengar cerita yang ada satu puak menentang P.Ramlee kerana Shaw memberi layanan macam anak emas kepada P.Ramlee kan.
Sabe bos kata what he wants, give it to him. Jangan kata oh ini tak boleh, itu tak boleh, oh ini mahal, itu mahal, tak boleh.
However, this special treatment was not extended to other actors or directors at Shaw Studio. Despite the backstabbing, Ramlee once more stepped into new cinematic territory, writing and acting in his first comedic film. Bujang Lapok was a film about three bumbling but good-hearted bachelors who were always on the lookout for love. Aini Jah overheard Ramlee telling friends about his new comedy.
Jadi cara dia bercerita tu terasa macam dah tengok wayang. Kerana P.Ramlee bila bercerita dengan gerak mata, dengan gerak tangan, dengan nada suaranya, sampai ke shot-shot semua dia bercerita.
Ramlee knew he needed people who were naturally funny to co-star in his first comedy outing. So he picked and indulged comedians Aziz Sattar and S. Shamsuddin to provide rare gems of comic improvisation.
Menyampah. Dia bagda tu jahat di susah. Dia nang butinang. Kui butai mi itu. Tertom-tom.
Kau suka hati kau dia, kau buat kau punya sendiri. Saya pernah takut bila dia cakap itu, alamak dia dah marah. Jadi dia tengok tu, cuba biasa sekali. Cuba last sekali, belum lagi. Lagi. Jadi apa yang dia dak tu tadi, hati yang terkucil tadi kau cakap tu boleh.
Hey Ramlee, siapa kau?
The film, when it was released, was an astounding success.
Ingkong kepala hutan kau, aku tengah berada daerah kau orang bising ha?
Dia mengaras orang Sabah. Dia boleh kontrol orang, tak boleh gini tak. Tapi saya dengan Sudin dia tak boleh kontrol. Apa yang saya buat mesti dia ikut dia. Yang saya bangga satu, bila saya tengok Bujang Lapok, tidak ada satu yang saya buat dia buang.
Pakcik, oh ni, tekanlah dengan dia ni.
P.Ramlee went on to create two more hugely successful sequels to Bujang Lapok. Fresh from the exceptional success of the Bujang Lapok trilogy, Ramlee wrote and directed a parody of Ali Baba and the 40 Thieves, based on the trilogy's characters.
Esok ngising, sembar ngising, kape wong potong ngising. Ali Baba!
Certain lines from the show, some of them spontaneous improvisations, would go on to make cult status among Malaysian audiences.
Ajis manising.
And although Ramlee played the villain for the first time, the film still enjoyed outstanding box office success. new actress Sarima remembers Ramlee teasing her on set.
Apa pasal pula?
Pisau melekat belakang aku dah.
Dengan ketakutan lah kan bila masuk jangan set ni P.Ramlee nanti menjerit timbo dia kata timbo tu saya pun tengok dia menangis lah air mata keluar dan dia datang saya on the 17 kan tu datanglah arwah Sudar Maji ni dia kata awak jangan begitu Ma dia kata dia tu bergurau supaya awak hilang darah lumur nak syuting ni tapi kita mana tahu kan
Selalu pun dia ambil berat. Dia kalau berlakon, dia tidak mau dia satu orang bagus.
Rupanya cantik. Umurnya 18.
But Ramlee may have crossed the line with his improvisations. It was almost banned by the censor board for improper depiction of the Arabic language and had to be redubbed with minimal Arabic accent.
300 dirham.
P.Ramlee went on to win 5 more major international awards from 1958 to 1964, during which he made some of his most popular comedies. But as he became increasingly engulfed by his art, his personal life began to suffer. Cracks began to appear in his marriage and fights with Norizan at home became more frequent.
Bincanglah asmara.
Hoping his problems would go away, P.Ramlee quickly immersed himself in a new film that took a critical look at the prevailing social class systems in the country. Not for the first time, the film's theme song, composed and sung by P.Ramlee, became a bigger hit than the film itself. And while the film was not a big box office draw, it received critical acclaim, validating Ramlee as a maestro director. By now, everyone wanted to act in his films, no matter how small the part.
Suadi, abang nak ambil kau berlakon dengan abang. Abang terus cium tangan dia, Dik. Terima kasih, bang. Dan saya tak tanya berapa harga bayaran. Pasal saya hendakkan arahan bawa dia.
Ya. Aku datang hendak memisahkan.
Dia dah keluar dekat panggung, barulah orang kenal saya siapa Kuswainata. Jadi ialah guru saya, ia naikkan nama saya.
His unique directorial style often left a lasting impression on his cast and crew.
Ramlee direct teliti pakai part to part perasaan orang dah betul perasaan lambat pun tak apa kalau dia boleh tunggu artis tu sampai 1 hari 1 malam sampai dapat isi shot.
While P.Ramlee's career kept soaring, things at home were deteriorating. Norizan's discontentment with her own marriage made her sensitive to Ramlee's working relationships, especially with his female co-stars. So when news reached home of Ramlee and former love Mariani rehearsing songs together at the studio, Norizan flew into a rage. Nasir, who was 8 at the time and living with P.Ramlee and Norizan, remembered that day.
Norizan ajak Terus dia ikut mami pergi rumah Mariani. Kami ada kereta Norizan turun.
P.Ramlee had no idea that the former and current love of his life were about to confront each other for the first time.
Tahu-tahu ada orang badan besar dekat pinggang tampar saya. Saya cakar dia balik. Lepas saya kata, trespassing. Get up from my house.
Mariani reported the matter to the police. Eventually, Norizan apologized in court. Mariani accepted, and the matter was quickly forgotten. But not by Saloma, who had just returned from her stint in Australia. She went after Norizan.
Dekat studio lah. Saloma sudah datang birang lah. Oh, dia cakap putih lah. You slap my sister lah, never mind. But one day I take your husband.
Saloma, by then an accomplished and popular singer, started performing at stage shows with P.Ramlee. And not long after, she was auditioning and acting in P.Ramlee's movies. Norizan, desperate to save her marriage, was driven to check up on her husband with the young Nasir in tow.
Pergi spot check, tapi P.Ramlee punya spy lagi terror. Bos datang bos. Oh, P.Ramlee marah apa? Saloma, you acting apa ni cik? Ya, ni betul ke? You acting apa? Mari, benar-benar tengok.
By 1960, the cracks in their marriage had deepened. Nasir remembered things getting stormy at home.
Dia orang kalau bergaduh lebih dahsyat tau ni. Tumbuk keris-keris semua. Norizan dan P.Ramlee. Dia bergaduh kami dia. Kami tengok P.Ramlee angkat. Pergi depan. Pengsan.
The marriage was in serious trouble. Rumours of Norizan's friendship with a younger actor and Ramlee's dalliances with his co-stars pushed the relationship to its limit. And after 6 years together, P.Ramlee and Norizan divorced. In one of her recorded interviews, Norizan, who left the palace for him, spoke of her frustrations with P.Ramlee, whose art eclipsed everything else in his life, including her. She felt unloved.
Dia tidak rasa diri Kak Nur ni, dia tak ada sayang pada Kak Nur. Jadi dia kata, Nur, I tak menceraikan ibu. Dia kata, tapi kalau ibu nak bercerai juga, okey, tapi I mesti sayang Kak Nur sampai nyawa dia gambar dan dia bersayang Kak Nur. Dia kata, masa tu Kak Nur tak boleh nak kan tak tahan yang dia buat Kak Nur macam dia tak sayang, tak kasih dengan Kak Nur sampai Kak Nur kurban dia keluar daripada kerana dia kan itu dia sampai sekarang pun Kak Nur kasih sayang Kak.
P.Ramlee himself never spoke of his troubled marriage to Norizan, who, unwilling to face her family, remained in Singapore after the divorce, before later moving to Kuala Lumpur.
Tapi kita tak boleh begini saja, Ram. Kita mesti lekas kahwin.
Nak kahwin memang senang.
After an 8-year hiatus, Saloma was firmly back on the scene, this time making an impression on the twice-divorced, much idolized and newly available P.Ramlee. Nasir, who was 9 years old then, recalls Saloma coming to take him out one day. He did not take a liking to her and told his father so.
Nasir suka nanti tu. I diam lah. Sampai I pernah tulis 1000 kali tu. I must love my auntie. I must. I tulis.
Despite his son's resistance to Saloma, P.Ramlee was set on marrying her. He confided in close friend Musalma, swearing her to secrecy.
Dia tak pernah ada secret dengan saya. Tapi tentang Saloma, dia nak kahwin dengan Saloma ni, saya boleh terperanjat ni.
But Ramlee was insistent, asking Musalma to help him arrange a marriage ceremony.
Boleh lah. Tapi saya ingat dia main-main. Jangan bilang sama siapa tau, ni secret tau, I nak kahwin dengan Saloma. Dan I tu jangan pun ingat, mesti dia temberakan I juga pasal dia suka bergurau. Dia kan betul.
Ramlee and Saloma's marriage took everyone by surprise. In one of his interviews, Ramlee said that he married Saloma not for her voice or beauty, but because they were soulmates. For Saloma, there was a fine line between being his soulmate and living with his eccentricities.
Mula-mula dulu saya pelik, baru-baru kahwin tak reti lah. Dia ni betul-betul ganjil lah. Saya belum pernah jumpa orang macam dia. Dia kalau nak bikin lagu ni tak kira masa. Kadang-kadang dekat bilik mandi tu kan, mak cakap dekat dalam bilik mandi, dia duduk berjam-jam, dia duduk fikir, sampai saya pun nak takut. Rupanya dia karang lagu lah, buat skrip lah, nanti tangan dia macam tu, macam tu.
Saloma embraced her married life with enthusiasm. As it turned out, she got on famously with Nasir.
Masa dia orang gaduh, Ramlee Saloma gaduh. Dia orang dua gaduh. Yang kaya I. Siapa dia orang gaduh, dia orang tak tegur. Ramlee nak minta apa? Guna you lah. Cik cakap dengan mama, mana diri punya ni. I diam je. RM1. Habis je mama ada mesej lah mama. Ambil dek mama tu. I kaya tau. I love her so much lah. Betul cakap, I love her so much.
Saloma was involved in many of P.Ramlee's successful films, but mostly in supporting roles. Where she had no acting role, they featured her exquisite voice. Singing was her first love, and that suited her husband well.
Oh, akibatnya jatuh merana.
Before long, they became the country's very own screen couple.
Kasim Selamat? Siapa dia Kasim Selamat? Lawyer? Magistrate?
Inspired by his newfound happiness with Saloma, P.Ramlee wrote, directed and acted in Ibu Mertuaku, one of his most highly acclaimed films. The film was not only a huge box office success, its theme songs surpassed the popularity of the film itself.
Masa dia bikin rakaman tu, mak ada kat sana, jadi dengar, mak boleh nangis dengar lagu tu. Nangis dia bilang, lah bang, lagunya menyayat hati. Mak cakap gini, dia bilang, Shima, dia bilang, ini lagu kau tengok, dia bilang, kalau kita panjang umur, dia bilang gini, walaupun 30-40 tahun akan datang, dia bilang gini, orang masih kenang lagu-lagu ini.
But it was during another of the film's songs, Jeritan Batinku, where Ramlee played the saxophone, that had audiences captivated across the country. Even though Ramlee had mimed the part, he did it so well that to this day many still believe that he was an accomplished saxophonist.
First kali filem dia Ibu Mertuaku, dia main saxophone. Tapi banyak orang bilang dia yang main. Actually bukan, dia cannot play saxophone. Yang main dalam Ibu Mertuaku Usop B. Tapi because P.Ramlee is a manusia yang luar biasa, sebab dia pegang piano kan, dia pegang violin kan, exactly like him play saxophone, the key semua betul.
The film won him an award for a specially created category at the Tokyo 10th Asian Film Festival in 1963, the most versatile talent. It was one of the highest recognitions yet for Malay cinema, and with this win, P.Ramlee's accomplishments as a filmmaker at the Shaw Studio were unparalleled. But on his return from the Tokyo Festival, the reception Ramlee got at the airport was in stark contrast to his previous wins. His return this time was met only by 3 studio staff, Saloma and his personal assistant, Ramlee Jr. He had come home to a highly charged situation between the studio and the union. The union's restriction of working hours had delayed the delivery of Ibu Mertuaku, forcing Ramlee to pay for the crew's overtime claims from his own pocket. The meticulous director found it tough to meet Shaw's one picture every 4 months demand, with limited shooting time and lack of scriptwriters.
Tahu dari sini.
Satu shot tu kadang sampai 1 malam dia ambil. Dia nak sesuaikan background projector tu dengan orang tu kan, manager tu semua. Especially when they close up tu, itu pakai lens yang paling bagus punya lens. Dia import lens tu kan, dia dia jaga close up tu, dia beli lens tu, dia suruh beli lens tu. Kadang-kadang gambar dia bikin nak masuk festival 6 bulan.
Penalized for the union's actions, Ramlee felt that his efforts and dedication were unappreciated. He began to get disenchanted with the studio. The lack of scriptwriters forced P.Ramlee, like most directors, to adapt from other stories. But he gave the audience what they wanted with simple but clever plots.
Ramlee is a very good man for Chedo, number one fellow, very clever, and nobody can see it. Even Lagu also like that. But nobody will know, what he has done. A wonderful chap, intelligent.
Ramlee created some of his best cinematic magic, and although he was far from content with the studio, the Shaws gladly continued to invest in him and gave him bigger budgets for bigger movies.
Kau boleh tahu siapa punya gambar yang mahal. Satu saja kan kau tahu kan. P.Ramlee lah. Especially dia best set. Kadang-kadang dia best set murah-murah dia kasi 2 hari sudah habis boleh bikin satu set. Kadang-kadang tak ada. 8 hari, 10 hari mau bikin dia punya satu set.
Terrible at handling his own money, Ramlee asked Kwek to deal with his finances and trusted him implicitly.
Kadang-kadang saya masuk ke bank, dia nak apa-apa saya keluar kasih sama dia. Ramlee, kau kasih sama saya simpan ni duit, kau tak hitung. Apa Mr. Kuih ni cakap macam budak-budak lah. Dia cakap sama kita itu macam, dia kata Mr. Kuih kalau mau pakai ambil, dia kata. Duit dia banyak lah, makan tak habis. Itu je dia tak betul maybe ni, tak tahu apa, saya tak tahu tanya dia.
According to Quack, they worked crazy hours to complete Ramlee's films quickly because they were guaranteed hits.
Kalau saya tahu bukan main bagus lagi dia main gambar, duit masuk bukan main banyak, kau tak ada. Habis kalau dia nak apa sikit lebih kurang, kau tak boleh kasih. Tak boleh lah. Saya kalau tak kasih sama dia, saya rasa
Continued success with his comedic films culminated in P.Ramlee winning his next and last international award for the film entitled Madu Tiga. In 1963, Shaw offered P.Ramlee the chance to direct his first colour film entitled Senewati in Hong Kong. He was also to direct his fifth sequel of the renowned Bujang Lapok comedic series there. P.Ramlee was ecstatic, but the excitement was short-lived. Without telling Ramlee, the powerful union demanded higher payments and allowances for Ramlee and his co-stars, forcing Shaw to cancel the production of both films. Ramlee was bitterly disappointed. It was a time when Singapore was facing heightened left-wing radical trade union activities, and strikes at the Shaw studios were attracting the state's attention.
Bila Perdana Menteri Lee Kuan Yew dapat tahu buat union ni, jadi dia tak suka Melayu ni buat union. So dia bilang Shaw Brothers, you better close down. So Shaw Brothers kata dia, you better go to Merdeka Film.
Disillusioned, P.Ramlee moved to Merdeka Studio in 1964 after directing his last film Tiga Abdul. He skipped the film's preview and saw it during its Kuala Lumpur run in the cinemas. Shaw studio manager Kwek Chip Jian had his own theory as to why P.Ramlee left the Shaw studio in Singapore.
Kita biar orang tak suruh dia pergi, dia tak pergi sebenarnya. Engkau tahu itu yang panggil sama dia siapa? Itu Tauke panggil dia sana. KCP punya orang tu. Nama dia Ho Alok. Dia cakap sama P.Ramlee, apa kau nak? What do you think of that? Apa kau nak?
Merdeka Studio was owned by Ho Ah Look and businessman H.M. Shah and managed by the Shaw family. P.Ramlee's absence was greatly felt at the Shaw Studios in Singapore. To his friends, P.Ramlee was like a bright star that shone on them. He helped to launch the careers of many. His departure left a deep void in their lives.
Saya ni seolah-olah macam anak ayam kehilangan ibu. Paksa saya struggle sendirilah. Kalau tidak ada P.Ramlee, tak adalah Kasim Masdo.
Kalau dia sitting, saya cukup hormat dia director.
He is a very good actor. Very good actor. Dia kalau ada dekat sini, semua happy lah. Dia nanti cakap macam-macam, dia menyanyi macam gila. Dia semua. Shooting pun senang lah, dia orang semua suka lah. Bila dia tak ada senyum, senyap saja.
The Shaws, however, did not completely sever their ties with P.Ramlee. They later acquired a significant stake in Merdeka Studio.
Dia begini, dekat Kuala Lumpur ni, peralatan studio, barangnya tak cukup. Barangnya barang lama. Barang yang tak habis, yang Singapura dah tak boleh pakai, baru dibawa Kuala Lumpur. Macam kamera, lighting apa. Kedua, orang belum mahir. Macam di Singapura orang dah mahir. Semua dah 10 tahun kerja. Kat sini semua orang baru.
Orang lama tu orang Melayu.
P.Ramlee had thrived under the system at Shaw Studio. Backed by a highly experienced production team, he could concentrate wholly on the creative aspects of his work. But the state of things at Merdeka Studio was very different. Tucked away beside a zoo with outdated equipment and inexperienced production staff, Ramlee joked with friends that he was working in a zoo and was about to be eaten alive by a tiger. Ironically, Sitora Harimau Jadian, or Sitora the Were-Tiger, became the title of his first movie at Merdeka Studio. He tried dabbling in special effects, but with a small budget and poor support services, he had to multitask, even doing his own editing. The film came out technically inferior. At the film's preview in Singapore, attended by actors Ahmad Daud and Sadia, the Shaw brothers walked out after only 15 minutes.
Saya kita sendiri tengok introduction dengan jerk, editing jerk, kejap dia buat diri jadi Frankenstein.
Ramlee would never again replicate the spectacular success he achieved at the Shaw studio.
Dia orang janji macam-macam, nak kasih dia buat colour filem, nak buat canggih-canggih lah, sinemaskop. Tapi bila dia sampai sini, tak ditepatkan janji, dia dah kecewa. Jadi dia punya creation bila bikin filem dah tak gairah macam di Jalan Ampas.
The advent of television, Hollywood, Hong Kong and colour Hindi films sounded the death knell of P.Ramlee's attempt to reinvent himself. P.Ramlee directed and acted in 18 more films for Merdeka Studio until 1970, including the popular Do-Re-Mi trilogy. The comedic series was meant to recreate his popular Bujang Lapok characters, but it failed to capture their innocence and lovable ineptitude. Laxmana Do-Re-Mi was the last film P.Ramlee directed for Merdeka Studio. At home, P.Ramlee lived happily with Saloma and their 5 adopted children. His only biological son Nasir had married and left home at 19. Ramlee realized that however dedicated he was to his work, he needed the emotional anchoring that only his family could provide. They meant the world to him.
Dia sayang betul anak-anak dia. Dia suka pijak baring, dia kena piarak kat sini. Nanti anak-anak dia dipanggil lah, pijak lah. Yang Sazali yang picit lah, yang si Sabarudin tu kan pijak, Jajah pijak. Dengan saya sekali pijak dia. Picit dia, itulah dia kesukaan.
His son Sazali was his biggest fan.
Otak dia macam dipunyai oleh Tuhan luar biasa. Tengoklah anak dia sendiri pun tak boleh ikut jejak dia. Daddy saya, dia segak, handsome. Saya tak handsome.
Ramlee liked to pamper his children, but he would be very strict when it came to music and schoolwork.
Dia kalau ajar dengan anak-anak dia memang serius. Baik kira-kira pelajaran sekolah maupun musik. Dia tak boleh main-main. Dia bila dah pukul saya, dia pujuk dia balik lah.
P.Ramlee tried to teach Nasir and Sazali to play the piano, but quick-tempered Ramlee would get really annoyed when they played badly. He would thump them both, but according to Nasir, it was him who usually got it worse.
Jadi masa saya lah, bapak yang bergerak, saya kena. Tapi kalau orang buat hal, saya kena. P.Ramlee mesti cari saya juga. Pukul dia bukan pukul tu teruk kan.
Satu hari saya tengok, saya pergi rumah dia, tengok dia tengah pukul Nasir. Pasal rambut panjang. Dulu Nasir rambut panjang. Bila saya sampai, dia stop. Dia tak dipukul Nasir.
Despite Ramlee's domestic upheavals, Ahmad Nawa, Ramlee's longtime friend, was privy to the star's other eccentricities.
Dia punya favourite tu Timika dengan kecap. Dan dia taruh cili kering sikit, ada cecah. Every time dia datang, dia call, dia kata, Ahmad, aku nak datang rumah. Saya prepare tu lah. Dan dia punya favourite gunting rambut. Yang jadi mangsa je Nasir lah. Dia gunting macam mana passion.
At home, when Ramlee felt like eating a particular cuisine, he would call up Mariani, his sister-in-law, who he was once in love with.
Ramlee ni dia very loving. Dia tak suka Saloma kerja teruk di rumah, macam masak-masak, sibuk-sibuk semua. Dia adakan orang gaji. Dia tak, Saloma sentiasa make up aja, cantik, duduk buat tattoo, buat labuci, gitu aja. Dia tak suka macam Saloma kerja-kerja. Yang kena dera saya lah. Bila nak masak lauk yang kesukaan dia, saya kena datang lah. masakan dia. Kalau mah duduk diam-diam cantik aja. Gitu. Itu dia punya perangai. P.Ramlee punya perangai.
Pampering Saloma was Ramlee's way of showing his love for her and keeping his family together. This was important to Ramlee, who felt that he had already lost one family, his friends at Shaw Studio in Singapore, whom he still missed dearly. In 1967, after 3 consecutive box office flops since Ramlee's departure, Shaw Studio on Jalan Ampas ceased production for good. It was the era of the swinging 60s and the world invasion of rock, soul, pop, reggae and blues music. The Bee Gees, the Rolling Stones, the Beatles and the Supremes all became household names, displacing P.Ramlee's brand of music and singing style. And while local pop singers struggled to compete with the new musical craze, P.Ramlee remained true to his music. The consequences were disastrous.
P.Ramlee pernah kena bu di stage di Dewan Bahasa Pusaka. Waktu tu malam 3 Ramlee, P.Ramlee, Ramlee, saya kameraman. Jadi bila P.Ramlee keluar menyanyi, semua orang bu. Saya tengok waktu pop di stadium penyanyi Singapura dengan Malaysia, bila penyanyi Malaysia keluar mesti orang bu. Jadi orang tak suka waktu tu penyanyi tempatan.
But these incidents only served to strengthen Ramlee's resolve to promote the preservation of traditional Malay music.
Lagu-lagu macam lagu joget, orkes combo, lagu-lagu asli, ghazal dan dendang sayang ini tidak pernah dipertandingkan atau dipertunjukkan. Kalau